And welcome everyone to this seminar, Regulating Cumulative Impact on Coastal Waters, arranged by FRAM, which is the Center for Future Chemical Risk Assessment and Management. And I'm Daniel Slung, and I will facilitate the seminar. Also welcome to our online participants and everyone here also at Natrium in Gothenburg. We have a great representation here with, as FRAM is a multidisciplinary center. So we have two presenters. We have Lena Gippert, who is a professor at the Department of Law, so a specialist in environmental law. And we have Dr. Erik Ytterberg from Mechanics and Maritime Sciences at Chalmers. So this will be a great mix. And they will present for, in total, for around half an hour. We'll have 15 minutes, more or less. Lena will start, and then we can have a few questions, and then Erik and a few questions, and we can have a broader discussion. So without further ado, let's begin. Welcome, Lena. Your presentation.
Good, and thank you, Daniel. And I think this is also an opportunity for me to mix, actually. I used to do like pollution, chemicals, but also biodiversity and green things. This project is called Preventing Small-Scale Physical Disturbance from Causing Large-Scale Turbidity and Loss of Coastal Habitats. The team consists of some biologists and also ecotoxicologists and me as a legal scholar. And we also have a collaboration with the SGU, Oskar Törnqvist and Pichara. I don't really know what their background is, but they do a lot of modeling and use satellites and those things. Some of us have started a cooperation within a program in relation to eelgrass, and it's called SORRO, Zostera Restoration or Zostera Marina Restoration Program. And this program came up because we saw there was a possibility that eelgrass were suffering from dredging material. So the FORMAS project that we will present from today actually has some different aims. So one thing is to identify a threshold for physical impacts that may cause regime shift to turbidity systems, and to investigate the impact from turbidity on specifically eelgrass, but also blue mussels. And then also, what is contain this material? What does it contain? And is it an important source of spreading, for example, TBT and other pollutants in the coastal environment? For us as legal scholars, we look at the how could the legal system handle cumulative impacts from specifically small-scale physical activities in the coastal zone, and particularly then in shallow areas? And if so, if not, could we come up with alternatives, either how to handle the current situation or legal situation and management, or to develop some new initiatives? And the key problem here is that we see a lot of cumulative impacts in these very sensitive shallow areas. So if we get a proposal for example, building a jetty or a new marina, that might be okay if you look at this picture, but if you look at the situation where we have seen a development for many years, we could say maybe we could not, the total impact on this bay would not handle it in relation to the environmental quality standards, etc., that we have set. So from my point of view, this is a question about how we regulate. And I started actually my dissertation 26 or 7 years ago, very long time ago, about environmental quality standards. Already then this is an issue that we discussed. So should you regulate, if you should regulate environmental quality in related, we talk about regulation that are relating to the activities and to those that are reacting to activities. And environmental quality standards is more about how the environment will react on different type of impact. But sometimes it's quite hard to, or it's impossible to regulate status or environmental quality because it's not possible to monitor or we don't have sufficient knowledge. But it can also be a question about how, if we want a good quality, we need also to know the total impact that could be actually that this environment could handle. And then from that, we should go to what are the human part of this, and to regulate this with different type of instrument. It could be supervision decisions, it could be permitting, it could be general regulation, etc. But the point here, the starting point was that, well, we have the possibility in the environment code to regulate environmental quality, but not total load. Not even in the program of actions or the programs of measures is that possible. So we have a lack in that what you can call legal operationalization chain. And it's also stated very clearly in the pre-work for the environmental code that we don't want that type of regulation. But we see a necessity or a possibility at least to have critical load standards. I think that is more been a stand or a concept that have been used, for example, in relation to air quality. So long-term range pollution, but less in relation to water quality. But what we wanted to know is it possible to prescribe limits or strict limits or guiding standards of total load? And how is about the current legal situation, and what legal effect do the environmental quality standards for marine environment have today, and could we then develop this? So I would say first that this is a study on both EU law and national Swedish law, and this is an area where we as legal scholars are extremely few people that even can discuss it because it's very complicated. It's, I would say also, now it's taped, so I should not say lousy, but at least not so good technically developed legislation, so to say. So just, I would say, with this project has been since 21, I think last month in May, we had a meeting with the legal scholar or lawyers at the Agency for Water and Marine Management. At that point, we at least can discuss with each other. We understand where we are, but it's so many hänvisningar, what's that? References to annexes, and so that is one actually thing now that we see as a delivery from this project is to be more clear about what are we talking about.
What's MSFD?
I will explain.
Okay.
So Water Framework Directive, if we then look to the EU level and then to the environmental code or the Swedish legislation, we have 4 directives that are kind of related here. Water Framework Directive asking or demanding a good ecological status, and we are approaching the deadline. It's 2027. Everyone gets very nervous now what will happen, but we still postpone also actions and decisions. But we are now in a, the Commission has put Sweden on the list of being sued in the European Court of Justice. Probably will be also. But then the next is Marine Strategy Framework Directive, and that is also a directive demanding good environmental status. But in relation to Water Framework Directive, that is there is quality factors in 3 different groups, and here we have one. If we talk about the shallow base, we talk there is quality factors on hydromorphological factors that are both vegetation and benthic fauna. In the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, we talk about descriptions and that describe what is a good status, and we in descriptor 6 we have about integrity of the seabed, and that is in annexes then described what is a good status for the integrity of the seabed. And now quite recently we have the new restoration regulation that will be implemented in just a few years. We'll come back to that. But also then the Habitat Directive. But habitat is more closed areas that are protected like Natura 2000. So how is this implemented into the Swedish legislation? Well, we have environmental quality standards in the 5th chapter of the environmental code, and it says that the government could issue regulation for one part of a country or the whole country for the quality. And that could be levels of pollution and disturbance, which sound a little like impact, but it should not be according to the work that has been promoting this legislation. And we have different types of standards. So we have some that, according to the first point, it's not to be exceeded. It should, and the second is more guiding standards that should not be exceeded. And then we have a 4th group. There is one about bio indicators also, but that says it's EU related. So that could be both what we call binding strict standards or guiding standards. And you understand about what it's about. If strict, then you could not exceed it. If it's guiding, it's more like yellow light in the traffic light. You should be aware and take care. Because of the discussion about how legally binding, what are the demands if we exceed? There was a huge discussions for many years. in Sweden, we thought it would be much more like guiding also the strict standards. That was what agencies and the government was promoting. But then we had a famous court case called the Weser case, where it was clear that it's very strict. So then it was a change in the environmental code where it says very clearly that you cannot decide on a permit, for example, that allows deterioration and or the standards not to be fulfilled. And that is important because this is relating to the Water Framework Directive, but not clearly to the Marine Strategy Directive. So sorry if it's not so visible. So what we are looking to now is to see in the this is the regulation that follows from the environmental code. So there is one for water called Vattenförvaltningsförordningen and one for the marine area, Havsmiljöförordningen. And if we look at the and then I should say, if there is area where we here. So if in coastal water, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive is only applicable if there is an area that is not regulated in relation to the Water Framework Directive. So, but when we look at the Water Framework Directive's good ecological status, it's quite limited because it's only hydrological quality standards that is restricted because it's only relevant if biological and physiochemical factors reach high status. It can be lowered in relation to the environmental quality standards. So could have effect, and that is a discussion now. We can see some court cases where it have been used as a motivation for stricter conditions to the permit. But so far, we could not say that it had been a useful tool for restricting impact. And when it comes then to the Marine Strategy Framework Directive or the implementation, we have, of course, also the relation to the big areas. So in Water Framework Directive is water bodies, smaller. Here it's huge areas like the Kattegat or Skagerrak, and then it's divided in the offshore and coastal areas, but still fairly big areas. So you can understand if we should regulate the impact on one bay or one area, it would be impossible. So that is one problem. But also then that we could see, it's I think I don't have really time to explain, but there is some criteria, not the standard as such, but the criteria how to interpret the standard, the good status, that actually indicate that there is also relevance to look at impact, but often related to effect and not only impact. So we have two possibilities, then either to look at what is defined as a good environmental status in the descriptor 6 here, or in relation to what is called environmental objective, that is to be decided to achieve good status. It's not just me not explaining very good. This is very strange formulated. So in Sweden also formulated as environmental quality standards in both. So we have environmental quality standards in order to achieve environmental quality standards here. But what we can see is that this is a then interpretation of the directives, but I will argue in my text that it's actually as binding as the water environmental quality standards. So that is something I need more to be more to motivate in a better way. But I think this is where I will my main conclusion. I think it would be possible to say that it's binding, but since it's large areas and very the criteria is not defined in the way, we don't have criteria for impact on these areas like boating or building. We have on trawling and some other things, but so a possibility for development. So this is the last slide. I think the main thing that we didn't think about it is that we need to clarify the legal situation. We need to be able to discuss this among each other. There is today no clear legal base for critical load standards. There are newly developed methods to monitor. So we have a colleague, Oscar, that has a method to actually define how much dredging could you allow further in this area. And we also see possibilities within the restoration regulation.
Okay, then we'll hand over to Eric.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, thank you very much for having me here. So my name is Erik Ytterberg. I'm from Department of Mechanics and Maritime Sciences and a new division, which is called Transport, Energy and Environment. It was developed to merge between two other divisions this year. And I have a short background from Gothenburg University as well. I was working with Åsa and Jenny, finalizing my PhD thesis, which was 13 years ago, something like that. So it's good to be back. I've been here several times before as well, but that was at Bhutan. And I did my PhD on antifouling coatings. And now I'm at Chalmers, and we are working on not only antifouling paints, but other types of emissions, primarily focusing on hazardous substances, but also nutrients and other types of pressures that shipping and also leisure boating can have on the marine environment. And what we typically like to structure our work, and also since we have a bunch of projects funded by different environmental agencies, is to use this concept called DAPSI. It stands for Drivers, Activities, Pressure, State, Impact and Response. So basically it starts with the drivers by society. That could be like human needs. So we need food, we need shelter, we need something to do during our spare time. So that requires different activities. So for instance, shipping, since we need to transport goods, and also leisure boatings that we would like to use during our summer vacations, etc., etc. And these types of activities could have different pressures on the marine environment. So anything from emitting chemicals to nutrients to underwater noise, etc. And that could have an effect on the environmental state. So for instance, increased nutrient concentration, which could have an effect on algal blooms and so on. And that in the end can have some impacts on ecosystem and ecosystem services and human well-being. And finally, you can then have a response. Do you see what building this is?
Yes.
Yes. So it's Havs- and Vattenmyndigheten. So then they can propose measures, as Lena mentioned before, to reduce the pressures on the marine environment. So I would just start showing a little bit about this concept and what we have been doing in other projects at Chalmers, and then come to the dredging part. So if we structure this and look at the activities, we start with the leisure boatings, of course, and then we have side activities needed in order to use leisure boats, and that can have coastal exploitations. We have piers, breakwaters, marinas, jetties, etc. And also you need to have some kind of dredging activities in marinas and in ports, and the dumping of those. And these can then have different kind of pressures on the marine environment, anything from hazardous substances, nutrients, etc., etc. And also, of course, emissions to the atmosphere. And finally, that can have an impact on the state and also on the impact of the ecosystems, such as increased concentration of hazardous substances and so on, and effects on biodiversity. Lena mentioned a bit about coastal water bodies, and that is something that we have been interested in looking into. What is the number of leisure boats present in the coastal region in Sweden? So we had a project a couple of years ago where we employed a person who went through this ortofoton from Lantmäteriet for 6 to 8 months and scanned the whole coastal region to identify jetties and also leisure boats. And based on that, we could then estimate the number of leisure boats in each of these coastal water bodies. And if you sum them up, you see that it's roughly 250,000 of leisure boats in Sweden, and that corresponds well to what has been estimated in a large survey called Båtlivsundersökning as well. So we trust these numbers quite a lot. And with this activity map, we can then also look at what kind of pressures we can have of hazardous substances. And since we are working quite a lot of antifouling paints, and copper is the main biocides used in antifouling paints, we estimated the total input of copper from leisure boats coated with copper-based coatings and compare that with other sources. So both from shipping, from various point sources, so coastal industries, atmospheric deposition, and also on rivers. And if we look at this is the Swedish west coast, you see that 23% of the total input to the coastal region is actually coming from leisure boats. And then you have 36 coming from ships. The situation is a little bit different when you look at the Swedish east coast, and the reason for that is that you are not allowed to use the same products on the Swedish east coast. It's lower copper concentration, and also that the copper is leaching much faster in higher saline water. That's why it's higher here on the west coast. Other kind of pressures that you can have from antifouling paints, it's the use of TBT that has been banned since 1989, but we still see when we have been out measuring with an handheld XRF instrument, then we screen for tin. So if we have really high concentration of tin, that's an indication that we still have organotin substances present on the hull. And this is unfortunately in Swedish, but here is from one survey that we did a couple of years ago, where we measured on almost 700 leisure boats, and we saw that a quarter of they contained high concentration of tin that could only be explained by presence of organotin compounds. And we also see that TBT is still being emitted to marinas due to under hull maintenance activities and so on. So, and also if we look at the environmental state, this is a compilation we did, or I did together with a colleague, Maria Lagerström, where we retrieved data from all the coastal Länsstyrelsen, what's that?
The administration board.
County administrative, what do you say?
Board.
Board, yeah. So and then we compare that with the EQS value that Lena mentioned about as well. So that's a threshold value what the environment can cope with, and then we see that the vast majority of the location, primarily in marinas and harbors, we exceed this EQS value. So leisure boating, they are continuously emitting different hazardous substances inside the marina, because the reason for that is that the leisure boats are primarily used between 10 to 20 days during a whole season. So most of it is being emitted where it stands, basically. regarding the activity, dredging and dumping of sediment, which I'm here to present primarily, is you know this, that the dredging, that means the removing of sediment from the bottom of, for instance, marinas and harbors and other water bodies. And it's done regularly, and the dumping of dredged material into water, that's generally prohibited in Sweden. So it always requires a special exemption. And you can only be granted that if you can demonstrate that the dumping will not pose a risk to human health or to the environment. But currently there are no national criteria or threshold values that regulators can use in Sweden that define what is then the maximum allowable contamination of a sediment intended to be dumped in the coastal region. And marinas and harbors, they typically have elevated concentration of both polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, organotin substances such as TBT, and then metals like, for instance, copper that I mentioned, but also zinc is typically a substance that with higher concentration in these areas. So what we were interested in assessing in this project is how TBT and then also other hazardous substances are considered in court cases regarding both dredging but primarily dumping of dredged material. And so what assessment methods are used? Are there any threshold values that are used, and what other grounds for approval are used in the permitting process? So we gathered data from 41 court cases in which the dumping of dredged material at sea was approved. And they were then analyzed with the focus on the assessment method for hazardous substances, and also if this threshold value has been used, and also other justification that was applied in the permitting process. And apart from that, we also asked the court for appendixes where chemical analysis of hazardous substances in December were compiled. And there were a bunch or a few at least of instances where we could not retrieve that kind of data. So in total, we ended up with 33 court cases that had data on chemical analysis. And regarding the results and the assessment method used, the vast majority or almost all of them used the Swedish EPA's assessment criteria. I will just explain that a little bit more in just one slide, what that is. But they used a class called 3 and 4, and that was evaluated for the concentration of PAHs, metals, and PCBs. While for TBT, they used the legal precedent for the dumping site at Vinga outside of Gothenburg. And that specifies that TBT concentration must not exceed 50 microgram per kilogram. So regarding this Swedish EPA's assessment criteria, or in Sweden it's called bedömningsgrunder för miljökvalitet, kust och hav. It's from 1999. It's not available online, at least I can't find it. So you have to get the hard copy from the library. And then you need to return it and get it back again. So what those criteria, they are based on deviation from background levels. So you see that you have 5 different classes here, and the contamination level of sediments is then assessed by comparing the environmental concentration that you retrieve from chemical analysis with this background concentration. And for instance, class 5 there, that's indicate that the concentration show very large deviation, which is generally referred at the 95 percentile. So the vast majority of the cases we looked into used this bedömningsgrunder för miljökvalitet, and they used the border between class 3 or the border between class 4 and 5 as an assessment criteria. So if we just plot then, this is then the data that we have then compiled from the classes commercial harbor or from leisure boat marinas. You see that it's a huge variation, anything from almost under the detection limit up to 60-ish milligram per kilogram. And they all then come into class 1, 2, or 3. So none of them are in class 4 or above. And if you look at TBC concentration, we see that they are we also had a very large variation, anything from under the detection limit up to a little bit more than 40 for the commercial harbors, but for the leisure boat marina, you see that we identified one which is up around 90. But then the court said that it's okay also to use 100, so they changed that threshold value instead. Okay, so regarding the EQS values versus the Swedish EPA's classification system, we understand a little bit more where they come from and what kind of data they depend on. So the threshold values, like Lena mentioned, they are used on the MSFD and the Water Framework Directive to assess environmental status assessment. And so we have a clear link when it comes to this DAPSIL framework that we go out in the field, we measure the environmental concentration, we compare that with the threshold value, which is based on ecotoxicological data, what the environment can cope with. And if we have higher concentration, then you should implement measures in order to reduce the pressure. But for the Swedish EPA classification system, that's based only from deviation from background levels. So that doesn't really imply that it necessarily has any connection to actual ecotoxicological effect data. So just to compare that, if you look at then the TBT value, I said that the EQS value here, that's 1.6, so it's extremely low here. But you tolerate something up to 50 in general, and also we have one case where you tolerate 100. But you're still allowed to dump that. And for copper, the EQS value set both in Sweden and also used by HELCOM, it's at 30. So here we have at least a few sediment in both harbors and marinas that are exceeding that. So methodology that we propose to use instead is that's a typical risk assessment where you compare your measured environmental concentration with the threshold value, so either EQS value or a predicted no effect concentration. And in our case, since we have several chemicals, we do a summation approach, so we summarize these risk equations and we get the cumulative risk assessment instead. So this is how the data would look like when we do that for all the PAHs, metals, and organotin substances identified in the different court errands. Once again, we have a huge variation, anything from almost 0 and up to almost 90. And the threshold value here, if it's above 1, that's indicate that we have risk for or unacceptable risk for adverse effects for sediment living organisms. But what happened now, this is in intact sediment. What happens when we dump it in the sea? That was a question that I was hoping to give an answer to at the moment, but unfortunately I'm not really ready with that. But we need dispersion models in order then to predict how the dumping of sediment will then increase the particle sediment concentration in different dumping sites, and what that will then correspond in terms of increased concentration of these hazardous substances and how that may what risk that may pose for benthic organisms. And that is something that we're currently working on. I was supposed to have this ready a couple of months ago, but now we have pushed the deadline, so hopefully we'll have a publication ready to be submitted after summer. And we then hope that this can then be used by environmental regulators and managers in order to assess what would a dumping of a specific sediment, what kind of risk may that have for increased concentration and also increased risk for adverse effects. That was me. Thank you.